was honored to become an ambassador. So my main, it's not all there, my main concentration has been in looking at ways that as Canadians, we can help support our children. And I've had a particular emphasis on their protection when it comes to their experiences online. Just to give you a little bit of history, we have in Canada signed the Convention of the Rights of the Child in 1991, just shortly after it came into effect in 1989. And the ratification process in Canada is quite complicated. So it's not just the federal government deciding that, yes, we're going to do this. It requires our provinces and our territories to individually also buy into the whole process and the whole project. And it's an important project. It isn't the first one. When we talk about the Convention of the Rights of the Child, this is something that has evolved over time, beginning with efforts that began in the middle 1920s, actually, in part in response to post-World War I tragedies and the impact that it had on children. People often ask, what are our obligations as Canadians? Well, in 2007, the Senate Committee on Justice looked at this, and it was clear, and they made very clear statements that Canada has obligations to meet all the principles that are outlined in the convention. We're almost 34 years later, and I'm very sad to announce that we have yet to meet all our obligations. And without imposing anything to you, Dr. Walsh, the United States is one of the only countries in the world that has not signed this convention, which is about protecting children. And a child is defined, just so you know, as anyone under the age of 18, even if other jurisdictions may have varying dates as far as that's concerned. So the committee that oversees the UN's Convention on the Rights of the Child periodically, I think it's every 4 or 5 years, visits each country, not necessarily I guess they do come in person, but they visit and look at how that country is performing. And consistently, in every report that has been shared back to the Canadian government, whether it's a conservative or a liberal government, has been, we lack a children's commissioner, someone who's going to stand up for children's rights. And I absolutely love the fact that you, Mayor, are going to have a chair in your offices that is going to remind you of the importance of seeing things through the lens of a child, seeing through the lens of what is coming. Okay? It's rather interesting that it was in 2021 that there was a comment, which is also part of the obligations in terms of process, called Comment 25. And that was the first time in terms of international law that the children's rights were recognized in the digital environment. And as we've already heard from numerous people speaking, and some of the comments that have come from some of our guests here, the importance of protecting children online. So basically, we're talking about duty to care and protect, and that is what we want our person to do. Sorry. So here you're going to see a picture that really sort of gives you an idea of the many, many areas that which the convention responds. And I think it's important to notice where I've circled things that particularly relate to child sexual exploitation, because that has been a concentration in terms of my research and work that I'm doing. Historically, when it came to children being drawn into trafficking, for example, here in Canada, the source would have been malls. People would go and see what was happening in malls, or they stand outside of schools and get an idea about what kids look like they're not really fitting in and might be more vulnerable. But today, vulnerability happens online. Exposure to pornography happens online. The average age of a child in Canada first being exposed to pornography is 9 or 10. years of age. And that is not a child seeking something, that is a child stumbling across something. And that's the average. So what I wanted to point out here is that it's really important, this convention, and it is important that Canada starts to follow those basic principles. Now, a lot of people would say, Canada, we're wonderful, and we are. I'm a very proud Canadian, yes, but it would be wrong, and we are naive if we think that Canada is functioning very well for its children. UNICEF Canada conducts annual report cards. And in 2020, they focused on one particular area, and that was the general well-being of children. So they engage with youth right across Canada, talking to them about some basic principles that would impact their experiences. We came 30th, I think, yes, 30th out of 38 countries. And those 38 countries are countries that have similar GDPs. These are our peers. We came in the bottom third when it came to how children themselves felt about their experiences. And one of the saddest and most tragic elements, I think, when you look at the data, so this is factual data actually coming from Statistics Canada, that Canada has one of the highest rates of adolescent suicide. I pause and say nothing because that has to sink in. And it works directly with the work I'm doing, because that means our kids are vulnerable. And the work that I do in terms of raising awareness about human trafficking and exploitation that happens in our own country, this is something, those vulnerabilities are very, very important. There you go. That's only 5 years ago. I'm not going to say that there hasn't been improvement, not necessarily in this category, but the government have, and there have been movements that have been positive for Canadian children and families, but we are certainly not doing enough. So when it comes to the internet, I'm just going to be very quickly through these things because I don't think the Children's Commissioner, the job of that person would be necessarily focusing on just the internet, but we need to address also access. We just want to make it safe. We want to champion reforms, and that is exceedingly important. We need somebody to help amplify the voices of children. The organization that I'm with is the National Council of Women of Canada, and we work hard with other organizations, and I invite everybody else to get involved as well in calling for a children's commissioner at the federal level. Just to point out a few things, there have been 7 different attempts on the part of government, be it through MPs or senators since 2000, of all parties and stripes calling for this. It's never managed to get quite there. As I've already mentioned, the committee on the convention has called for Canada to have a federal commissioner. The Association of ombudspersons across Canada from at the provincial and territorial level have all called for a federal commissioner. We are fortunate enough that we now have a Secretary of State for Children and Youth. This is a new position that has just evolved and that will be held by Anna Gainey, who is a Montreal MP. That's good news, but it's not enough because they need to be independent, they need to be nonpartisan, and they need to be consistent. We need to be working very much focused exclusively, not on directives coming from a PMO's office, although I'm sure we'll be getting good directives. But we need to have someone who is going to keep looking through the lens of children, and to address a whole range of issues. But when it does come to online harms, I'm going to mention 2 bills. 2 which are now gone because of the process of government having been prorogued and then going through an election process. Bill S-210 was Senator Julie Méville-Duchesne from here of Montreal. This was a bill which called for protection from children's exposure to pornography. For those who are involved in anything that has to do with child exploitation, they know that pornography is used to desensitize young children into the sexual exploitation. So I mean, the fact that children are being exposed at such an early age involuntarily, and that it's also being used by predators, is extremely scary. Unfortunately, that bill never made it through the House, and it was getting a lot of pushback, to be honest. I don't understand why, if we're very comfortable with norms in the offline world, why we have such trouble in pushing forward in the online world. I have some hope that we will be able to follow the leadership that we've seen in the EU, in Australia, in South Africa, in Singapore, and around the world, where they have made great steps forward on this. There is the online harms bill, which will have an opportunity to be revisited. One of the things that I would like to point out that a children's commissioner would have been in a position to do was to say, great, this is good. You had some really interesting things in this online harms bill, particularly around cyberbullying and harassment, which are serious, serious problems. But the government, unfortunately, in preparing this bill, paired it with issues around radicalization and freedom of speech. We live in a democracy here. We're going to talk. We're going to maybe not listen as much as we talk. And that was going to cause a situation in our government process that was going to slow everything down. Would we have been slowed down if we'd had a bill that was independent, that focused exclusively on children? I think we would have been a lot further ahead if, looking through the lens of our processes to protect children, we had kept it separate, then I think we would have been many steps ahead, because right now we are behind. So I am very much hoping that as we move forward, that the peace movement here, that those of you who are with other NGOs and organizations, that you will adopt and push for a children's commissioner at the federal level. I'm very happy to say that I presented 2 or 3 days ago to the Canadian Council of Churches, who have signed on to this project as well. And it is important that we reach out to other groups and organizations so that there is a volume of efforts towards establishing this. I don't want to take up too much time. So yes, this is important. I think I've already mentioned some of the things that are already on this line. I've gone completely off topic. I'm sorry, this happens to me. I'm very passionate about this. And that passion comes from my faith. It comes from the opportunity to speak to and engage with people such as yourselves around these tables. This is important work. These are our children. These are born of love, and we're failing them at the moment. So just very quickly, in Europe, in England, there is a children's commissioner who has played an important role in terms of protecting children online. And you can see that there's even just a few days ago, or actually 3 weeks ago at this point, but she's engaging with the government, calling in terms, you were talking about AI, sir, earlier, banning apps that create naked images of children. Canada hasn't even started to talk about this, or if they're talking, they haven't put anything on paper. And we need to go through a very complicated process to bring any programs in place. Or banning AI notification apps. There are many challenges ahead. There's a lot of wealth and experience, but there are many challenges ahead. And so I'm going to conclude. Sorry, I'm trying to be good and stay in my time limit, but it's important. I believe a children's commissioner plays a crucial role in advocating for children's rights, their welfare, and ensuring that their voices are heard. And I believe that we can influence policies and then really significantly improve children's lives and therefore all our lives. All our lives. It's a benefit to all of society. Anyway, again, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I hope you will join in this advocacy project of the National Council of Women of Canada and others. And I thank you for your time.